The mechanics at the forward airfield near Metz, France, couldn't believe what they were seeing. Someone had bolted 6 metal tubes under the wings of a P-47 Thunderbolt. Not sleek bomb racks, not the newer rocket pylons they'd heard about. These were crude steel cylinders that looked like they'd been salvaged from a plumbing supply warehouse. 3 tubes clustered together on each wing, held in place by metal bands and electrical connections that seemed almost comically primitive compared to the sophisticated machinery of the fighter itself. "What the hell are those?" one crew chief asked, walking around the aircraft with obvious skepticism. "Bazooka tubes," the armorer replied, not looking up from his work. "M10 launchers. Each one fires a 4.5-inch rocket." The crew chief laughed, a sharp bark of disbelief cutting through the November cold of 1944. "You're telling me we're going after panthers and tigers with that? Might as well throw rocks at them. Those things will fall off the wings before you even get airborne." He wasn't alone in his doubts. Across American airfields in Europe, the introduction of rocket-armed P-47 Thunderbolts met with reactions ranging from cautious curiosity to outright mockery. Pilots who'd spent months perfecting the art of dive bombing and strafing looked at the ungainly tube clusters and saw a solution in search of a problem. Some called them stovepipes. Others used less charitable descriptions. The modification seemed to go against everything that made the Thunderbolt effective, adding drag, reducing maneuverability, and introducing a weapon system that, by all accounts from early tests, couldn't hit the broadside of a barn from the inside. But that was before they burned their first Tiger tank, before the skeptics became believers, before bazooka thunderbolts carved a path of destruction across Nazi Germany, so devastating that even hardened Wehrmacht veterans learned to fear the sound of radial engines overhead. The story of how the P-47 Thunderbolt earned its reputation as a tank killer begins not with rockets, but with a Georgian immigrant's radical vision of what a fighter should be. Alexander Kartveli had fled his homeland of Tbilisi to escape the Bolsheviks, eventually finding his way to the United States and a position as chief designer at Republic Aviation. In the spring of 1940, as reports from the Battle of Britain filtered across the Atlantic, Kartveli faced a professional crisis. The Army Air Corps wanted a lightweight interceptor to match the German fighters tearing through European skies. What Kartveli proposed instead was something that defied every contemporary notion of what a single-engine fighter should look like. The XP-47B, which first flew on May 6, 1941, was a monster. It weighed 9,900 pounds empty, 65% heavier than the fighters it was meant to replace. Powered by a Pratt & Whitney R2800 double Wasp 18-cylinder radial engine producing 2,000 horsepower, the aircraft required a massive cowling, extensive ducting for its turbo supercharger system, and a cockpit positioned so far back that early pilots joked they were flying from the tail. When Kartveli presented the design, he acknowledged its unconventional nature with characteristic bluntness. "It will be a dinosaur," he told skeptical Army officials. "But it will be a dinosaur with good proportions." The proportions included 850 caliber Browning machine guns, 4 mounted in each wing, staggered to allow side-by-side ammunition feeding. All 8 guns together produced a combined rate of fire around 100 rounds per second. The firepower was devastating, but it added weight. So did the armor plating, protecting the pilot and vital systems. So did the self-sealing fuel tanks and the sophisticated turbo supercharger that gave the aircraft its remarkable high-altitude performance. By the time the P-47D entered mass production, a fully loaded Thunderbolt could weigh up to 17,500 pounds, 8 tons of fighter bomber, the heaviest single-engine combat aircraft in the world. The Thunderbolt entered combat over Europe in March 1943, assigned to bomber escort duty with the 8th Air Force. At altitudes above 30,000 feet, where the thin air defeated most German interceptors, the P-47 ruled the sky. Its turbo-supercharged engine maintained power where others gasped. Its rugged construction absorbed battle damage that would have destroyed lighter fighters. Pilots discovered they could outdive anything the Luftwaffe flew, using the Thunderbolt's massive weight to build speed in vertical maneuvers that left pursuing Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs falling behind. The 56 Fighter Group, flying P-47s from bases in England, developed tactics that played to these strengths: diving attacks, energy fighting, using altitude and speed rather than trying to turn with the more nimble German fighters. But as the air war evolved, so did the Thunderbolt's mission. Pilots returning from bomber escort runs began attacking targets of opportunity on the way home: railroad yards, truck convoys, airfields. The 850 caliber guns proved devastatingly effective against soft targets. A 5-second burst put 500 rounds of armor-piercing incendiary ammunition into a target area 3 feet by 3 feet. Locomotives exploded. Trucks disintegrated. Parked aircraft burned. Ground crews and pilots started to realize the P-47 had found its true calling, not as a high-altitude escort fighter, but as a low-level ground attack aircraft that could survive the murderous flak environment long enough to do real damage. This realization coincided with another development. In late 1943, American ordnance engineers were struggling with a problem. The British had achieved remarkable success using rocket projectiles, specifically the RP-3 3-inch rocket, against German armor and fortifications. American forces wanted similar capability, but the available rocket, the M8, presented significant challenges for aerial deployment. The M8 was a 4.5-inch high-explosive rocket originally designed for ground-based launchers. Each rocket weighed 40 pounds and carried an explosive charge roughly equivalent to a 105-millimeter artillery shell. The warhead could penetrate light armor and cause devastating fragmentation damage. The problem was launching it from a moving aircraft traveling 300 miles per hour. The M8 required a tube launcher. The rocket had to be fired from inside a cylinder that would guide it for the first critical moments of flight until its folding fins deployed and stabilized its trajectory. Early attempts to mount single tubes under fighter wings failed spectacularly. The tubes created massive drag. They were difficult to align properly. Electrical connections failed, and the accuracy was abysmal. Rockets tumbled wildly after launch, missing targets by hundreds of yards. The solution was the M10 triple tube launcher. Engineers bundled 3 10-foot tubes together, binding them with metal bands at 6 points along their length. The entire cluster attached to the aircraft wing with 2 mounting straps and a set of electrical connections that linked to the rocket igniters. On paper, it worked. In practice, when the first P-47s equipped with M10 launchers took off, they looked ridiculous. The tubes hung below the wings like awkward afterthoughts, disrupting the clean lines of Carpenter's design. Pilots reported increased drag, reduced top speed, and handling characteristics that made the already heavy Thunderbolt feel even more ponderous. Worse, the rockets still couldn't hit anything. Early combat trials in Italy and Northwest Europe were exercises in frustration. Pilots would dive on a target, fire their rockets, and watch as the missiles corkscrewed wildly downrange, impacting hundreds of feet from the aiming point. The problem was multi-layered. The rockets themselves were inherently inaccurate. Manufacturing tolerances meant each M8 had slightly different thrust characteristics. The tube launchers amplified any misalignment. And pilots, accustomed to the instant feedback of machine gun tracers, struggled to develop an intuition for how to aim weapons that took several seconds to reach their target and traveled on an arcing trajectory nothing like bullets. Ground crews hated the systems. The tubes were cumbersome, difficult to load, and prone to electrical failures. Pilots complained that the launchers reduced their aircraft's performance in air-to-air combat, exactly when they might need every advantage to survive an encounter with a Luftwaffe fighter. Some units refused to use them. Others tried them for a few missions, declared them worthless, and went back to conventional bombs. The M10 launcher program seemed destined to join the long list of wartime weapons that looked good on paper but failed in combat. The skepticism reached its peak in the weeks after D-Day. As Allied forces pushed inland from the Normandy beaches, they encountered increasingly heavy German resistance. Panther and Tiger tanks, nearly invulnerable to conventional anti-tank weapons, anchored German defensive positions. American Sherman tank crews learned quickly that engaging these beasts head-on was suicide. The German tanks could destroy Shermans from ranges where American guns couldn't even penetrate their armor. Ground commanders screamed for air support. They needed something that could kill Tigers. Could the rocket-armed P-47s do it? Most pilots doubted it. The .50 caliber machine guns, devastating against soft targets, could barely scratch a Tiger's armor. Bombs worked, but required a near-direct hit, difficult to achieve against a moving, well-camouflaged target shooting back with everything it had. The rockets, with their poor accuracy, seemed even less promising. Toy planes with bazookas, one pilot called them, echoing the sentiment rippling through fighter-bomber squadrons across France. Then, on a morning in late June 1944, something changed. Major Glenn Duncan of the 353rd Fighter Group was leading a flight of 4 P-47s, each loaded with a pair of 500-pound bombs and 6 M8 rockets in triple-tube launchers. They'd been called in by a forward air controller, supporting a column of Shermans that had run into a German defensive line anchored by 2 Tiger tanks. Duncan's flight found the Tigers hull down in a tree line, their massive 88mm guns commanding the approaches. Duncan made his attack run from the northwest, diving at a shallow angle to keep his speed up and minimize his exposure to flak. He pickled his bombs first. Both missed, exploding 50 yards from the nearest Tiger. Then, almost as an afterthought, he triggered his rockets. All 6 M8s rippled off in sequence, trailing smoke as they arced toward the German position. Duncan pulled hard, feeling the G-forces press him into his seat as he zoomed back up to altitude, expecting to see nothing but more near misses. Instead, one of his rockets impacted directly on the Tiger's engine deck. The thin top armor, designed to protect against artillery fragments, couldn't withstand the M8's high explosive warhead. The rocket punched through, detonated inside the engine compartment, and touched off the Tiger's fuel tanks. Black smoke erupted from the stricken tank. Seconds later, the crew bailed out, silhouettes against the flames consuming their vehicle. Duncan couldn't believe it. Neither could his wingmen, who watched the entire engagement unfold. Neither could the Sherman tank crews on the ground, who'd been preparing to withdraw in the face of superior German armor. The radio chatter exploded with excitement. A P-47 had just killed a Tiger tank with a rocket. 1 shot, 1 kill. Maybe these bazookas weren't toys after all. Word spread fast through the fighter-bomber community. If Duncan could do it, others could too. Pilots started paying more attention to their rocket attacks, experimenting with different dive angles, release altitudes, and aiming techniques. They discovered that the M8, for all its inaccuracy at long range, was actually quite effective at close range, 300 yards or less. At that distance, even the rocket's inherent dispersion pattern worked in the attacker's favor, creating a beaten zone large enough that at least 1 or 2 rockets from a 6-rocket salvo would impact near the target. And near was often good enough. The M8's explosive force could disable tracks, knock out vision ports, or cause enough fragmentation damage to force a crew to abandon their vehicle. The key was getting close. Close enough that flak gunners could shoot back. Close enough to see the details of the target, the markings on the armor, the desperate movements of crew members trying to bring their weapons to bear. This was not the clean, high-altitude warfare of bomber escort. This was brutal, intimate combat, where mistakes were measured in milliseconds and paid for with your life. But the Thunderbolt could take it. Time and again, P-47S returned from ground attack missions with battle damage that would have downed any other fighter. Holes punched through wings by 20mm cannon shells, flak fragments embedded in the radial engine, which somehow kept running. Hydraulic lines severed, electrical systems shot out, tail sections ventilated by machine gun fire. The massive R2800 engine, with its 18 cylinders arranged in 2 rows, had so much redundancy that it could lose multiple cylinders and still produce enough power to limp home. The armor plating protecting the pilot and fuel tanks turned hits that should have been fatal into survivable damage. Lieutenant Cliff Sorry learned this firsthand on November 20th, 1944. He was attacking a convoy of German trucks northeast of Sargamund when a small caliber flak shell smashed into the right side of his engine cowling. The impact was immediate and violent. The R2800 developed a disconcerting vibration. A chunk of the cowling tore loose and flapped in the slipstream, and engine oil began spraying back onto the windshield, making forward vision impossible. Any rational pilot would have considered bailing out. Sorry, guided by his wingman and flying by instruments he could barely see through the oil-streaked canopy, nursed his crippled Thunderbolt 125 miles back to base and landed successfully. The engine, inspected after landing, had taken damage that should have caused immediate seizure. It kept running for 2 hours. Stories like Sorry's multiplied across the fighter-bomber groups. The P-47's legendary toughness, combined with the increasing effectiveness of rocket attacks, turned initial skepticism into grudging respect, and then into outright enthusiasm. By the time of the Battle of the Bulge in December 1944, rocket-armed Thunderbolts had become the ground force's preferred close air support weapon. When German armor pushed through the Ardennes in Hitler's desperate winter offensive, P-47s flew through appalling weather to attack German tank columns. The weather that was supposed to ground Allied air power, low ceilings, ice, terrible visibility, proved survivable in the rugged Thunderbolt. Pilots flew mission after mission, sometimes at altitudes so low they could see the expressions on German soldiers' faces, delivering rockets and bombs with devastating precision. The destruction statistics tell the story. From D-Day to VE Day, P-47. Thunderbolt pilots claimed the destruction of 6,000 armored fighting vehicles, including tanks, tank destroyers, and armored personnel carriers. They destroyed 9,000 locomotives, 86,000 railroad cars, and 68,000 trucks. During Operation Cobra, the American breakout from Normandy, the 405 Fighter Group caught a German column trapped near Rancy and attacked it for 6.5 hours straight. Post-battle ground investigation found 66 tanks, 204 vehicles, and 11 guns destroyed in that single engagement. These numbers represent more than statistics. Each destroyed tank was a Tiger or Panther that wouldn't be shooting at American infantry. Each demolished locomotive was supplies that would never reach the front. Each burning truck was ammunition that wouldn't be firing at Allied soldiers. The P-47, armed with its toy bazooka rockets, had become a strategic weapon that changed the calculus of armored warfare. German tank crews who'd dominated battlefields from France to Russia now had to worry about threats from above as well as from the front. The psychological impact was profound, knowing that any movement during daylight hours could bring the wrath of rocket-armed thunderbolts. Pilot accounts from the period reveal the evolution in tactics and confidence. First Lieutenant Robert Brule, operating from K-29 Airfield in Belgium during January 1945, described the new reality of ground attack missions. You would have an Army guy in a Sherman tank talking to you on the radio, he remembered. The integration between ground forces and air support had become so tight that tank commanders could call in specific targets, talk pilots onto them, and adjust fire in real time. The M8 rockets, once derided for their inaccuracy, had become precision weapons in the hands of experienced pilots who understood their limitations and worked within them. The technical reasons for the P-47's success in the ground attack role went beyond just toughness and firepower. The aircraft's size, initially considered a liability, proved advantageous in several ways. The large wing area provided a stable bombing and rocket platform. The Thunderbolt didn't bounce around in turbulence the way lighter fighters did. The powerful engine gave pilots options in combat. They could accelerate out of trouble, maintain energy in climbing turns, or use their weight to build devastating dive speeds for attack runs. The visibility from the cockpit, once the pilot got used to the long nose, was actually quite good for spotting ground targets. The M10 rocket launchers, for all their initial problems, had been progressively improved throughout 1944. Better electrical systems reduced ignition failures. Improved alignment procedures increased accuracy. Pilots developed standardized attack profiles that maximized hit probability, typically a 30 to 40 degree dive angle, release at 400 to 500 feet altitude, pull-out initiated immediately after rocket launch. The triple tube design, initially mocked as overcomplicated, turned out to be brilliant. Firing 6 rockets in rapid sequence created a pattern that compensated for individual rocket inaccuracy. By early 1945, as Allied forces pushed into Germany itself, the P-47's reputation as a tank killer was firmly established. New pilots arriving at replacement training units specifically requested assignment to Thunderbolt squadrons, attracted by the aircraft's combination of survivability and striking power. The skeptics who'd laughed at toy planes with bazookas were either converts or casualties. The ground crews who'd initially doubted the M10 launchers now serviced them with the same care they gave the .850 caliber guns because pilots' lives depended on both systems working flawlessly. The transition from mockery to mastery had taken less than a year. In that time, the rocket-armed P-47 Thunderbolt had gone from experimental curiosity to essential weapon. It proved that even the most unpromising technology, properly deployed and persistently refined, could achieve remarkable results. It demonstrated that size and weight, considered disadvantages in fighter design, could become assets in the ground attack role. And it showed that the combination of a rugged aircraft, powerful weapons, and skilled pilots could fundamentally change the nature of armored warfare. More than 15,000 Thunderbolts were built between 1941 and 1945, more than any other American fighter. They flew over 500,000 combat missions, dropped 132,000 tons of bombs, and achieved an aerial kill ratio of 4.6 to 1. But perhaps their most significant contribution was not in air-to-air combat, but in the mud and smoke of ground attack missions where they faced German armor and won. The legacy of the rocket-armed P-47 extends beyond World War II. The lessons learned about close air support, combined arms operations, and the importance of aircraft survivability in the ground attack role influenced post-war American tactical aviation for decades. The Fairchild Republic. A 10 Thunderbolt II, the modern Warthog, takes its name directly from the P-47 and carries forward its philosophy. Build an aircraft tough enough to survive the ground attack mission, arm it with weapons powerful enough to destroy armored targets, and it will bring pilots home even when everything goes wrong. Those early skeptics at the airfield near Metz in 1944, laughing at the bazooka tubes bolted under Thunderbolt wings, couldn't have imagined what was coming. They couldn't have known they were witnessing the birth of modern close air support. They couldn't have predicted that the toy plane with bazookas would burn Tiger tanks, terrify Wehrmacht veterans, and help win a war. But the pilots who flew those missions knew. Every time they dove through curtains of flak to put rockets on target, every time they pulled hard at 400 feet, feeling the airframe shudder under the strain while tracer fire reached up from below, every time they counted the holes in their wings after landing and realized the Thunderbolt had brought them home again. They knew they were flying something special, something that looked like it shouldn't work but somehow did, a dinosaur with good proportions, a 7-ton fighter that fought like a tank and killed tanks like a fighter. If you found this story as compelling as we did, please hit that like button right now. It genuinely helps us share these forgotten pieces of history with more people who need to hear them. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. We're bringing you new stories from the Second World War every single day. Real aircraft, real pilots, real courage. Drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. Are you in the United States, United Kingdom, Canada, Australia? Our community spans the globe, united by respect for the people who fought and the machines they flew. Tell us your location. Tell us if you have family who served. Just let us know you were here. Thank you for watching, and thank you for keeping these stories alive.